Hello, welcome back. Or if you happen to be new, my name is Delian. This is the channel where we explore becoming the main character of our own lives, which I believe we're all here to do. And this is the Enneagram series where I break down every type and what I believe their journey is towards transformation. So if this kind of content is interesting to you, helpful, or valuable in any way, I would love if you would like, subscribe, or comment. I live for the comments. Tell me about your experience with your Enneagram type, what you would nuance with what I'm saying. This is essentially what I feel like a living document of a channel where we get to explore together. So I can't wait to see you in the comments, and let's go ahead and start. So you're an Enneagram 8. Welcome. As you can probably see, Puppy Dog is here with me. She may or may not have some things to say during this, and as an 8, I'm sure you would be more than happy to hear that. So if you haven't watched any of these other videos, what I'm doing is I am breaking down what questions need to be answered in order to create a character who's going to go through a transformational arc in a story. And I'm answering those questions through the lens of the Enneagram types. So for every character that must be created, the first question that must be asked is, what do they want? This is going to be what's driving them, what's creating momentum. This is going to be the pull and the push throughout the story. And the stronger the want, generally speaking, the better the story. And for Enneagram 8s, what they want is to be strong, to be independent, to be in control of their own life, to protect themselves and those they care about while living with their own power and integrity. Whew, that's a very strong character. I think we see a lot of character 8s in stories. I'm going to talk about why I think they often don't get put through a transformational arc, but rather are the steadfast characters. But I'll get to that in a little bit. You deserve your transformational arcs as well, versus just being the one who's taking care of everyone. So with every character, we also need a wound. And the wound for Enneagram 8s is that it's not okay for me to be vulnerable or to trust anyone to protect my own sense of innocence. There's a lot of narrative around no one else is trustworthy enough for me to even allow them to protect me. And so I must become strong enough to protect myself. Okay, that's, again, we're building a really intense character already, right? What is their intelligence? Like, how do they naturally move through the world? Well, 8s are in the body triad, and they have an instinctual gut awareness of how they're going to move through the world. A lot of times, 8s have a knowing that they don't know how they know, and they move in that direction. 8s are thinking and doing faster than any of the other types. They have the most energy of any of the other types, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but this is a lot. They're very physically aware. They're very conscientious of being physically capable and mentally capable, generally speaking. They are very conscientious of having agency over their own bodies and their environment. And it's very intuitive for them to move through the world that way. All right, what is their fear? Got to have this one, because without this, there's nothing really internally getting in the way of the character going through their arc. This is what they have to face. And they fear failing by being too weak or incapable. Again, you're going to hear like lack of agency being a big fear for 8s. And with that comes In the Enneagram world, this is called the vice, but I almost, in terms of building a character, this is the self-saboteur, but it's the part of the character where this is what they had to do in order to adapt their circumstances. And it's like it helped them to a certain extent. And now in the transformational journey, it stops helping them. It can become a problem. And for 8s, this is called lust. And this is going to be how I define that for 8s. Choosing to stay in their intense energy for all of life. It's like being on high octane all the time. This could be just sexual energy, but for 8s, it's like everything. It needs to have a high level of intensity, that like they need their intensity to come out. They need other people to meet them in that intensity. They want life to be at this level. And this is the lust. You can see how this was probably really helpful for moving them into strength for a long time. Let me know if you're an 8, what you would add to that, what you would nuance, because I think this is a vice that gets misspoken about a lot in the Enneagram circles. So from there, a character has to have a strategy. What are they going to do with this natural makeup, right? And for 8s, they're going to assert themselves. They're going to take charge. They're going to challenge others. They're going to do all of that to hide their own vulnerability, to protect. And a lot of times they outsource. How do I want to say this? They project their innocence onto others, and then they protect others. This can show up in a little puppy dog. This can show up in people, especially children. But anyone that 8 sees as innocent, it's almost like they will spend a lot of energy protecting that innocence, because it's almost like how they want to take care of themselves too. But I'm going to get to how this is tricky for 8s in a little bit when we get to the transformational part. Okay, so 8s are in the independence stance. And this is where I'm going to break down the big part that they need to embrace in order to move into the transformation of this character arc. So that when we know what stance somebody's Enneagram is, and for 8s, this is independent. This means that they are action first. And then second for them is thinking. And third for them is emotion. 8s tend to move through the world, like I said earlier, thinking and doing so fast. Those two things are so close together. They are able, generally speaking, to strategize and make things happen like at the same time. It's incredible. I've seen it in action and I'm always like, oh my God. But this means that they're least, there's lots of language that it's like, that this area is repressed or unproductive. I also like thinking of it as just the least accessible. And the way that shows up for 8s is that almost all of their emotions get funneled through anger. They feel sad, gonna get angry. They feel happy, they're gonna get angry. Anger is just the easiest emotion for them to be in touch with, because again, it's a driving kind of emotion. And when 8s start getting in touch with their own emotional world, this is when we start seeing the ability to move through the transformation of their wound. And I think for 8s in particular, I'm a little scared to say this because I don't think anybody else is talking about it. And I think some of that is because 8s don't like talking about it. But I think that their emotions, it's not that they don't have access to emotions. It's that they don't want to feel tender. They don't want to feel vulnerable. They got that messaging when they were young that their own innocence wasn't protected and the people around them weren't capable of protecting that innocence. And so they armored up. They got strong. They're thinking and doing, and they're going to keep those tender feelings far away because those are really uncomfortable to get in touch with because they're probably going to have to go through some grieving. And I think that unless they have someone in their life, maybe many someones in their life that can hold that space for them, I think it's hard for 8s to get there. I think it's also hard for 8s to let somebody else be the person who can hold that space for them. And that's understandable. So with that, the transformation of the wound, and I talk about this a lot because I think that every Enneagram type has a wounded narrative, which we talked about earlier for 8s, and then there's a healed narrative. And the healed narrative is what I think the work is for each of the types to start implementing, to start moving into. And for 8s, this is starting to change the narrative from it's not okay for me to be vulnerable or trust anyone to it is okay for me to be vulnerable and to trust someone. It's not everyone, because you're right. Not everyone is deserving of your vulnerability. But I do think it's important for 8s to find someone that they can be that vulnerable with. And I admit that sometimes this process is actually really hard because it's hard to find somebody who is strong enough to truly sit with you. And as you move into that narrative of, I can let myself be vulnerable and need someone or trust someone, you can start having spaces where you can take your armor off and allow your childlike wonder and love of life to come forward. I think that 8s actually have this bountiful, youthful energy that when they are given that support, they can then express this tenderness, this sweetness, this innocence. So I want to pause here and talk a little bit about why I think 8s often don't get a transformational arc and instead are supporting characters. And by even if they're the main character, they often are going through something where they're protecting others and they're having to face something outside of themselves, and they're not necessarily going through an internal transformational arc. And I think it's because, a little bit like 4s, it takes more work to write this character and this specific storyline. So for 8s, I think, this is hard. You'll have to let me know if you're an 8 if this is true, because remember, I am using this channel as a platform to be like a living document. Let's talk about this. Let's explore it. I'm going to share what I know and have experienced up until this point, but I want to hear your thoughts. But I think that 8s really do need somebody to show up in their life to be strong enough and capable enough to be able to hold that space for them to be able to step into that vulnerability, into that innocence. And that tends, there's a few stories I can think of that happening for 8s in literature, movies, TV shows. Roy Kent, I think, is a really good example. He has people who show up as strong enough to support him to become more vulnerable and open. And that's, out of all of the characters, I think that there is something that's happening for 8's that's outside of them, that they really do need the world to step up to be able to do to help them be able to have some of this openness for themselves. And I think that's tricky. I think we live in a world where we really want it to be like, you do the work by yourself, like you don't need support. And 8's, I think, really like living in that space. So it's like, of course I don't need anybody. Of course I can do this by myself. But interdependence is healthy. And I think that for 8's, there is something about that transformational. Like if I was going to write this character, somebody shows up for them so that they can be softer and tender. And I think that some of the transformational journey for an 8 is that when they were younger, it wasn't even just that no one was capable of protecting their innocence, their child self. But I almost wonder if 8's don't also have some kind of narrative around thinking that they were unworthy of that protection. If you're an 8, please let me know. And that some of the work they can do on their own is to have the narrative of that they are worthy of that protection. So let me know if you're an 8, if that hits or if that doesn't seem quite right. So anyway, as an 8 does move into being tender, being able to express and have access to essentially their inner child, then we start seeing their virtue show up. We start seeing them experience being able to put down that intensity of their vice of lust and instead move into the virtue of innocence, which again is allowing themselves to be supported and held gently and tenderly, that they can enjoy the sweetness of life, that they can move into a childlike wonder of the world. And genuinely, when 8's get here, when they get to be in this space, there is a soul level rest they get to have that is so beautiful to see. Like, it makes me want to cry. I am a 4, so that makes sense. But this is one of the reasons why I think that 8's get misjudged a lot, because people don't realize that what's happening is that they are so tender on the inside. And that is why they have to be so strong on the outside. And what they need, truly, I believe, is someone else to be just as strong, so that they can at least have a moment. Like, let somebody take the reins for just a bit so that they can sit back and play and experience the sweetness, the softness part of life. And again, for the part that might be up to the 8 to do some inner work on, it could be that narrative of going, I am worthy of protection. My innocence was always worthy of protection, even though you didn't get it. So as an 8 goes through and starts living in the virtue, right, this innocence, this is the shift of when they begin to live in the vulnerability rather than intensity. This creates an environment of true empowerment, because I think 8's love empowering people. This is the gift I think they want to give others. They don't get it when everybody else doesn't seem to want it. But when they are able to be in that openness, that tenderness with themselves, I think that 8's inadvertently tend to activate other people's nervous systems, because a lot of us don't know how to be challenged and also feel okay about ourselves. It takes a lot of work to get there. And so when 8's are able to allow their own tenderness to exist, I think they're able to meet other people with some more tenderness, and then this empowerment space is far more accessible for other people. And I think that 8s get a lot of enjoyment from that. And I think that this also creates more true connection versus just the 8 doing all of the work of protecting everyone all the time, or even having to protect themselves. So in that, they're able to truly allow the experience and the goodness of life. I have heard it in many 8 characters. When I do breakdowns of 8 characters going through how this looks like in actual stories, one of the common things I hear is something sweet happens for them, and it's usually that person who shows up in their life that is actually strong enough for them to be softer, and they say something like, I'm just afraid that this is going to get taken away. And there's almost always some sort of deserving that gets tied into that, a really vulnerable, like, and again, I don't know if it's actually deserving or worthiness. This is why I need to hear from you 8s, because this would be new terrain. I haven't heard other people talking about this. But I have seen it so often now in stories where the 8 says, I just think that the universe is going to take this away because I got something too good to be true. And that breaks my heart. And I really think that what 8s get to experience in this final shift is that they are, in fact, allowed to have all of that goodness, all of that beauty, all of this softness that life can offer. And this doesn't mean that you stop advocating or stop protecting or stop challenging, but I do think it means that you can truly allow yourself some rest and peace and support. So, I've gone on and on. Please let me know. Please let me know what you think. I want to do so much work around dispelling some of the Enneagram 8 literature, because I think that 8s are often misjudged. And I think a lot of the literature out there does not do you service and does not actually support you on your own journey, or have or be told in a way where other people can support you on your journey. So I see you. I think that you're incredible. I know you think you're incredible too, but I also think that you are worthy and deserving of having that sense of childlike wonder in your life to be able to truly rest when you need to. So thank you for watching. If you found this valuable, please like, comment, subscribe, share it with an 8 in your life, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. So, all right, I will see you in the next video. Bye.